Urgent. Drones are striking Russia, Putin is in hysterics, and what the enemy is preparing for Ukraine. We'll talk about this and more today with Roman Svitan. Roman, we are glad to welcome you. I wish you all good health. Friends, give this video a like to support Roman Svitan's analysis. We're also interested in your opinion on the topics we'll be discussing throughout the broadcast, and as always, don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. We are reading everything, and we will ask for your comments right now. Roman, let's start with the fact that we really have good news about unidentified drones flying into Russia's territory. Mayor Sobyanin said that allegedly several drones were shot down as they were approaching Moscow. There was also information from Russian ZD military correspondents claiming that 14 UAVs were shot down over the Bryansk region, 8 UAVs over the Belgorod region, and 3 UAVs in the Moscow region. Roman, what do you know about this attack, its consequences, and the overall architecture of such strikes at this stage, based on what we can publicly discuss? It can be traced through the publications of Russians. The route of our drones to Moscow, it also goes through the Bryansk and Belgorod regions. General direction is to north. A land of unscared idiots. But the thing is, these idiots have already gotten scared and wrapped Moscow in 6 layers of air defense. It is not yet possible by region, and it is still a large area. But they've already sealed off Moscow. At least the drones won't come into Moscow. You have to understand this clearly, because those few rings of air defense against low-flying, low-speed, non-maneuvering targets are enough to shoot down almost all of them. That's why there's no point in going to Moscow by drone right now. In the Moscow suburbs you can, no questions asked. The Russians are destroying them since the architecture is quite widespread. That is, they are destroying drones, mostly decoys. We cover our combat drones with a certain number of decoy drones. But nevertheless, the Russians spend either a missile on them or get a helicopter or airplane in the air to shoot them down. And it is at least airplane hours. They are not cheap for Russians, up to $5,000 per hour. For the use of aircraft, a certain amount of work is also being done here, and we can see it in Russian public forums. 10 drones were shot down over the Bryansk region, a dozen over the Belgorod region. Strike several drones go through, perform a certain combat mission if they come in on target, or at least hit the Russian economy, since they have to ground almost all civilian aircraft. That's tens of millions of dollars in losses. That's a definite point too. The only thing is that real military objectives are not fulfilled by this kind of action. If you mean Moscow, you have to send ballistics to Moscow. We are waiting for ballistics. It's already been announced. After all, we need to see at least one ballistic missile, at least one on the Kremlin. Show us. The day before, you and I were also talking about a possible mass shelling of 1,000 drones on the territory of temporal Russia, including Moscow. This was actively covered by Russian propaganda and ZD military correspondents. Friends, what do you think about this? I'm interested in your thoughts. How much do you expect that in the near future thousands of drone aircraft will be flying at once into the territory of Russia? You can share it right now under this video, but Roman, the day before there was a massive missile and drone attack on the territory of Ukraine. Our defense traditionally performed as efficiently as possible. We now have the latest layout of the drone and missile attack, a visual, and we can see its flight paths. And what is interesting, the enemy attacked Ukraine with 415 means of aerial attack. There were drones, missiles, ballistics. What can you say? Where did they fly to? A lot of drones were flying to the capital. How would you assess the air defense's performance, and is it correct to expect that such attacks will only continue in the near future? I'll argue a little bit about effective. If our air defense had worked as effectively as possible, the drones wouldn't have entered Ukrainian territory. Drones in such quantities that now the Russians can produce with the Chinese, and no one doubts that this is a Russian-Chinese Garand. The main intelligence directorate confirmed 65% of the parts are Chinese. All foreign intelligence agencies confirm this is a Russian-Chinese production. And since the Chinese have joined the task of assembling small unit at their place, large unit in Russia, the number of drones will increase. That's what we're seeing, so everyone was waiting for an Israeli miracle after the destruction of the mining factories in Iran. It didn't happen because it's not shod. Iran is not shod. It is not Iranian production. It is Russian-Chinese. And these hundreds of drones that they produce per day, they then store them somewhere, collect them, and send several hundred of them in our direction. Why isn't it maximally efficient? Efficiency is good. There's no question about that, but not maximally efficient. Why? Because we don't have a dense frontal air defense. It's been said a billion times, too. To destroy hundreds of drones, they must be destroyed in a frontal 50-kilometer depth. Along the whole front line or the Black Sea coastline so they don't come into us. From Odessa to Belarus. If they will come in from Belarus, there is already such information that some Russian drones are starting to come in from the territory of Belarus. After the first approach of a strike drone confirmed from the territory of Belarus and inflicting some kind of damage, we should immediately burn down the Belarusian Moser oil refinery. Straight away, 40-50 kilometers to it, you don't have to fly long. One drone flew into the territories of Belarus and Volyn and immediately burned down the Moser oil refinery. The second drone flew in, we burned down Naftan oil refinery. A third drone flew in, we burned Belkalium, let's say, and so on down the list. To turn off the economy of Belarus so that it will be discouraged from letting drones through its airspace. There should be no half measures. We are dying. We have hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians who have already died. We have to respond firmly to this kind of unfriendliness, at least at this stage. And in order to fight Russian drones, we don't need to come up with anything new here either. It's all been invented before. Dense frontal air defense. Move all mobile groups to the frontal level there. To the level of management, let's say, of the Corps. It is better to form Army air defense brigades and Corps at once, since they are already being formed. All the mobile groups, several thousand of them. At the very least, there will already be machine guns, practically Tachankas on wheels, but airborne. 1.5 kilometers in range, in height, a machine gun can't reach more than that, and Russian drones pass the front at a height of more than 1.5 to 2,000 meters. So you can't get them much with machine guns anymore, at least not the ones above. So we have to get them either with anti-aircraft guns or short-range surface-to-air missile systems up to altitudes of 5 to 7 kilometers, because drones will not go higher than 4 to 5 kilometers. They almost all come with internal combustion engines. They're atmospherics, so-called. Hardly anyone will put compressors on them to raise this drone above 4 kilometers. So they'll be traveling in a window of 2 to 4 kilometers. Most of the drones with internal combustion engines, they're coming in this window, so we have to put in mobile short-range air defense systems and man-portable air defense systems. Manpads are great, up to 5 kilometers, 4-5 kilometers. Almost all manpads perform this kind of task. They can do it. So reinforce, especially now, there's a new kind of interceptor drones. These brigades should be reinforced with interceptor drones, and this is the kind of veil that must be created in front of the main flow of Russian drones along the front line. And the breached aerial targets can get through, drones with jet propulsion can get through. They have turbines that can go above 5,000. Anything that goes above 5,000, including cruise missiles, can be intercepted on our territory with the help of a so-called airplane carrier. Fighters above 4 to 5 kilometers and at speeds near sonic, and light engine aircraft from a kilometer to 4 kilometers and up to a kilometer by helicopters, plus anti-aircraft missile systems of medium and long range. Here's a mechanism, a system to intercept any number of drones, any number of aerial targets. And against ballistics, it's clear that this is aerial interception, so-called. Against ballistics, only ballistics on the Kremlin is possible. There are no other options either. We will not cover our country with anti-ballistic missile systems. There are not so many of them in the world. That is not given to us. We are not included in the Aegis system. These systems can intercept on upward trajectories at long ranges. What's coming to us, though, is just the mirror answer here. The first ballistic missile should immediately go to the Kremlin. As soon as the Russians just look in our direction, 2 missiles appeared, immediately both on the Kremlin. In this mode, the Russians should develop a reflex, and at the level of idiosyncrasy. They've heard about Ukraine, and it should make them cringe, not because we're hitting them with missiles, but simply because it causes internal pain. This is how it's supposed to work in this mode. This is how we need to finish off the Kremlin to develop such a reflex. Good predictions, fixed. We believe that this will happen sooner or later, and that, in particular, ballistic missiles will fly more and more frequently into the territory of Russia, including Moscow and other military facilities. And sometimes in the context of aerial attacks on Ukraine, there is, I should add, unrevised, unofficial information, but nevertheless such theses have now appeared in the media. Let us talk about the fact that Russia is preparing to attack bridges over the Dnipro in Kiev with missiles. This is being reported by Telegram channels and some media. Among the possible list of targets are the Northern and Rybalsky, the Peyton Bridge, the Darnitsky, and the Southern bridges. Roman, how should we interpret this information, and to what extent do you agree that the Russians might actually strike the bridges? What is the idea, what are the tactics, and what does it mean in practice? In your opinion, how much can they accomplish this task? They've been ready to hit the bridges for a long time. There are certain restrictions on this kind of action. And these constraints are also geopolitical. There's a big question to exactly this kind of action. They're ready today, it's a matter of expediency. Any such strike, he can trigger our response on various positions. The ones we haven't touched so far, but we can touch, and we already have those mechanisms in place. That is, the backlash. The Russians are simply afraid to work on bridges on some points, especially since our response is going to come right away. And the feasibility of trying to disable bridges, it's pretty questionable. Why? Because it is possible to reach the bridge with a missile or to disable it, especially the old Soviet bridges. Remember how many times we tried that Antonov bridge with different levels of missiles, different levels of devices, then only it was deflowered, no more than that. Therefore, the efficiency of such actions may be minimal for Russians. But the backlash and negativity of the world can be very harsh. To the point that Russians will have to get out of Ukraine very quickly. If, for example, after such strikes our partners decide to give us Taurus-level missiles, it will immediately cause such a reaction. I mean, the Russians are calculating it perfectly. I'm not talking about Tomahawks after all. Trump could freak out and give us, say, 100 Tomahawks. That's 2,500 kilometers. Good evening, we are from Ukraine. We'll be heard in the Urals at Uralvagonzavod. And the Russians understand this perfectly well. They're weighing the 4th year of large-scale offensive operations. They're constantly weighing the risks in making this kind of decision. Although at this point, technically, they could, say, with Iskanders try to hit the bridges, Trying, but it's pretty hard to get in. Possible, but complicated. And the more bridges are covered by REB systems. At least they should be covered, it's already too blatant. And this is already accuracy is not insufficient for missile approach to a certain direction. That's probably why the Russians are still hesitant to hit the bridges. And the fact that they have now launched a wave of the possibility of striking the bridges is most likely an attempt, in terms of information and psychological special operation, to prevent our leadership from making a decision by striking the Kremlin with proposed already ready ballistic missiles. This could be it. This is an attempt by the Russian command to somehow scare the military and political leadership of Ukraine with such actions. Continuing the topic of drone attacks, the Wall Street Journal writes that Russia has already launched 24,000 drones at Ukraine just in 2025. How much do you agree with such figures? Because we also talk to you about the number of drones on a regular basis. Because different information is coming out, now we're talking about the fact that the Russians will very soon be able to launch 1,000 drones at least several times, primarily for intimidation and certain information attacks, including for that reason. How do you assess such a publication, and you say that war is mathematics? Does everything add up here? The main intelligence directorate has confirmed it. Confirmed that the Russians can produce 150 to 200 drones per day. That's a 6-month figure. It's about what the tabloids are reporting right now. I mean, it adds up. Let's move on to other topics, because the day before yesterday there was information that a SBU colonel was killed in the Holosivsky district of Kiev in the morning, shot 5 times at close range while leaving the entrance, according to the press service. Roman, what do you know about this murder from what we can say publicly, because we should add that there is very little official information. But what can you say? It is obvious that the Russians are behind this murder. And here you have a word, because we understand that the enemy's tactics are changing rapidly now. Attacks on military personnel and security service representatives will only increase, as well as on media figures. What do you think about this killing? Russians or not, at least you can 100% guarantee that it's in Russian interest, that's for sure. Why? Because the colonel of the security service, who died while performing, in principle, a combat mission, because the SBU in our country, especially the special services of the SBU, they have 24/7 fulfillment of the combat mission wherever they are. There is a certain control system that is remotely accessible, and you could say that this colonel died in the performance of a combat task, especially at the hands of a hitman. Once again, in the interests of Russia, that is unequivocal. The question of who performed, who generated the task, and so on and so forth. This is where security counterintelligence will look into it. We lost a security patriot, and you could say it's those patriots from back in 2014 who did the right thing. That is, they did not change their oath to the people of Ukraine. I just lost my friend with whom I met the Russians in Donetsk, the head of counterintelligence of the security service in Donetsk region. Alexander Harabarush, he was blown up, heaven rest his soul. And there are very few such people in the security service, at least those who are still left from 2014, who will definitely not betray the people of Ukraine. There are a fair number, but not many, because there's a new generation now. General Malyuk has cleaned up the security service. In 2014, part of the SBU practically switched to the enemy's side. In 2202, some of the SBU also defected to the enemy. And these colonels, these patriots, they remained loyal to Ukraine and their oath to the people. And the actions of the security service counterintelligence at the moment confirm this. The purge within the security service continues. Working now on other system and power units are counterintelligence military. This could also be, by the way, just the initiation of the murder of our colonel, our patriot. We have work to do. I think counterintelligence will do the job now. We'll discuss both the motives, the generation, and the performer in the near future. Once again, though, it is 100% in the interest of the Russian FSB. Roman, returning to military support and air attacks on Ukraine, there are several important statements. Merz assured that Germany plans to purchase Patriot systems from the U.S. for further transfer to Ukraine. This is an interesting statement. To what extent you think it is valid, to what extent we will really be able to receive Patriot systems or Patriot missiles in the near future, any military assistance that is important to us, to what extent this case can be implemented further. What do you know about it? How realistically in the near future we may receive new systems of air defense in this case? This is the best option for us when European funding of various levels is involved in the supply and closure of our skies, in the supply of Patriots. Although, once again, we need more than 100 of them. In other words, it takes about 50 Patriots to cover our major infrastructural facilities. And to shut down the whole country, we have 500,000 square kilometers now of unoccupied territory and 100,000 occupied. So at least to cover 500,000, you need more than 500 Patriots. It's unrealistic. It's unrealistic to procure. It's unrealistic to work with them. The best option is a mirror answer on Moscow, on the Kremlin, with our ballistics. This is the only way. There are no other options. And the fact that European financial institutions will now participate in the supplies is what we needed. This is just the sort of positive from Trump's inauguration or his winning the presidency. It was after his actions, his statements to Europe, that it became clear that the matter of Europe's security is in European hands, not in American hands. Americans can only stop or degrade that security. The Europeans are now adopting financial instruments, deploying manufacturing capabilities to keep the money flowing out of the EU. And such mechanisms will provide us, it should be clearly understood, with a certain number of anti-ballistic complexes, but not enough to cover the whole of Ukraine. Many thanks to the Germans in this sense. Germany, of course, is ahead of the world, especially since they have given us practically a third of their entire stockpile of ATGMs, and they have their own tasks. After all, there are enough Russians in the Baltic direction too, and the exclaves of the Kaliningrad region, and St. Petersburg's exit to the Baltic. So they need certain defense systems too, at least at this level. And the Germans may now be increasing their purchases from the Americans for themselves as well. First of all, they will restore what was handed to us. Maybe we'll get something else. You can't do it quickly. The thing is that the complexes are transferred realistically a few months, and if very quickly, a month and a half or 2 months. That's why by the end of the summer, we may get 1 or 2 complexes under this program. Although we are waiting for a few more programs, one of the programs is the delivery of another complex from Germany. They can take one system off combat duty and transfer it to us. And now the United States has a couple of complexes for additional staffing, which they can also transfer to us. Theoretically, at least, if it is decided not to move them to the Middle East to cover U.S. bases from local resistance strikes. Finally, let's discuss the statement from volunteer Taras Chmut that Ukraine is fighting a war of attrition and is gradually losing. We are bailing water out of the ship. This was said by Taras Chmut. Perhaps we are talking about more global philosophical issues. How much do you, first of all, agree with such theses that we bail water from the ship? And how would you assess the events on the battlefield? Is it correct to say that we lose on the battlefield, or is it incorrect to say so, in your opinion? The fact is, if you look at the front line at the moment, the Russians have a summer military campaign. It started a little bit sluggishly, but they started it nonetheless. Now, the second wave of Russian reserves is on its way. And basically, on the battlefield, I mean the front. We have negatives related to the lack of personnel. We have also said many times we need to increase the ratio from 1 to 7, at least 1 to 3. The Russians have an offensive advantage right now. But it's basically clear that is any offensive operation at least 1 to 3, so here we need as defensive 3 to 1 to have. And to do this, we need to put the security forces in line. Now these processes are beginning. Here is the first law, a correct law, which is now being passed in the Verkhovna Rada on admission to civil service only after service in the armed forces. This is the first step. This is the first brick in the common wall of our security. This will provide an opportunity to flood the front lines with motivated professional fighters and stop the Russians from moving. Stopping along the line of contact in defense mode will give us the opportunity to accumulate certain reserves for long-range strikes. And here it is very important that we should realize that Russia can be defeated. It is possible. And not even as long as everyone thinks. It can be done in 3 and 4 years if you hit Russia's most painful points. They have 3 pain points. The main pain point is Russia's oil refining industry. It's the Russian economy. It's what this colossus hangs on. Those legs of the Russian Empire, that colossus. So these feet of clay are oil. They just have to be run over. It wants to burn itself. It's oil, it's gas, you just set it on fire. And such mechanisms have already been launched but stopped. We can't stop it. If we start burning the Russian oil industry, there will be nothing for the Russians to fight with. There is simply nothing, because the Russian army will simply not get enough diesel, gasoline, or aviation kerosene. Then she can't move. Donkeys don't get very far. Everybody understands that. We're just not using all the mechanisms we could use to fight Russia. Here's the first mechanism. I've covered it. The second pain point is the Kremlin. These are strikes on Moscow. We need ballistic missiles. For the 7th year, the authorities have been telling an announcement about a certain launch of serial production of ballistics. Ballistics are not. So we need to put pressure on Moscow. Once the first ballistic missiles go to the Kremlin, believe me, the situation will change dramatically. And the third pain point is Crimea. The liberation of Ukraine will begin with the liberation of Crimea with the means of defeat, drones, missiles, aviation, uncrewed boats, underwater drones, various mechanisms that will liberate this operational cauldron of geography in the first place. And it's basically a year and a half's work by and large. Those options are there, so I don't entirely agree with the categorical nature of such statements that we are losing. We are losing some tactical issues because the battle line is not saturated with motivated, proficient fighters. In reality, we do not use all the mechanisms that we could use, but this is a question for the authorities. Roman, thank you for this conversation. Thank you for your analytics. Roman Svitan, pilot, instructor, and reserve colonel, answers the key question daily. Vladyslav Solovyov was with you. Friends, give this video a like. Only this way will Roman Svitan's analysis be seen by as many people as possible, including those in Russia. Also traditionally write where you saw us, your cities, your countries. We know there are a lot of you. Don't forget to subscribe and see you soon.